For 50 years, Paul Harvey was an institution in American radio. Each day, 24 million listeners tuned in his unique brand of news and views. His most famous segment was the rest of the story. He would recount a set of perplexing circumstances and then pause for a station break. And then he'd return saying, "And now for the rest of the story," which usually had a strange, unexpected twist. Well, 2 Samuel begins with its own version of the rest of the story. 1 Samuel ended with us thinking that we had gotten the full scoop on the death of Israel's King Saul. That on Mount Gilboa, in the heat of battle, he was shot with an arrow. Saul knew that he was about to be captured, and cruel treatment awaited him at the hands of his enemies. And so he asked his armor-bearer to do him in with his sword. Well, when his armor-bearer refused, Saul fell on his sword, a suicide. 2 Samuel 1 tells us nothing that contradicts the account of Saul's demise in 1 Samuel 31, but it does reveal the rest of the story. Now it came to pass, after the death of Saul, when David had returned from the slaughter of the Amalekites, and David had stayed 2 days in Ziklag. You recall Ziklag was now charred ruins. It had been burned to the ground by the Amalekites in their retaliation for David's raids. Well, on the 3rd day, behold, it happened that a man came from Saul's camp with his clothes torn and dust on his head. Ripped clothes and a dust shampoo were oriental signs of grief and agony and loss. This particular fellow was in deep distress. He was mourning, which reminds me of the 2 Greek philosophers. They were best of pals. One was a teacher by trade. The other one was a tailor by trade. Well, one day the teacher tore his robe, and so he brought his robe to his friend to have him mended. Well, the tailor saw the rip, and he said, "Euripides?" And he answered, "Yes, Eumenides?" Eumenides, Greek philosophers. Well, a man comes to David with shredded clothes, okay? And so it was when he came to David that he fell to the ground and prostrated himself. And David said to him, "Where have you come from?" And so he said to him, "I have escaped from the camp of Israel." Then David said to him, "How did the matter go? Please tell me." And he answered, "The people have fled from the battle. Many of the people are fallen and dead. And Saul and Jonathan, his son, are dead also." And so David said to the young man who told him, "How do you know that Saul and Jonathan, his son, are dead?" And in verse 6, the man shares, as Paul Harvey would say, the rest of the story. Then the young man who told him said, "As I happened by chance to be on Mount Gilboa, there was Saul, leaning on his spear. And indeed the chariots and horsemen followed hard after him. Now when he looked behind him, he saw me and called to me and said to me, 'Who are you?' And so I answered him, 'I am an Amalekite.'" Now remember, the sin that caused God to withdraw his spirit from Saul and anoint David as king was what? It was Saul's failure to kill off all the Amalekites. How ironic that now an Amalekite is going to finish Saul off. Again, Saul's partial obedience to God ended up coming back to bite him. It does that even years later. Well, the man says, "Saul said to me again, 'Please stand over me and kill me, for anguish has come upon me, but my life still remains in me.'" Now, apparently the episode in 1 Samuel 31 had already transpired. Either this Amalekite is lying, thinking that if he takes credit for killing Saul, then he can gain David's favor, or Saul actually fell on his sword but survived botching up his suicide attempt, which may be. You remember Saul always did things halfway. He refused to fully follow the Lord. Now he can't even kill himself. He's got an arrow in him. He's leaning on his spear. He's got a sword now stuck in his gut. He's a sauce kebab. He's wounded, but he's alive. And if the Philistines capture him, you know what they're going to do? They're going to nurse him back to health enough to do unspeakable cruelties to him. Saul would rather die, and so he asked the Amalekite to kill him. He says, "So I stood over him and killed him, because I was sure that he could not live after he had fallen." I just went ahead and I put the king out of his misery. And I took the crown that was on his head and the bracelet that was on his arm and have brought them here to my Lord. Now, no doubt the Amalekite expected some reward from David. He thought he was doing David a favor. Maybe he would receive a post in his new government. He thought Saul's demise would be good news to David, but he didn't know David's heart, did he? No. Therefore, David took hold of his own clothes and he tore them. And so did all the men who were with him. And they mourned and wept and fasted until evening for Saul and for Jonathan his son, for the people of the Lord and for the house of Israel, because they had fallen by the sword. And this was not the response that the Amalekite expected. Remember what Saul's death would have meant to David. He can finally go home now. He can be reunited with his family and friends. The throne that God anointed David to occupy was now vacant. It was now waiting on David to claim. David's life was no longer in peril. He could now settle and live in the land that he loved. But rather than jump for joy, David rips his clothes. And he mourns for Saul, for Jonathan, for all of Israel. And here's an important example for us. David takes no joy in another man's demise. And neither should we. Never kick a man when he's down or even dead. You never know when you might end up wounded on the battlefield leaning on your spear. Well, surely a lot of David's mourning was over the loss of his pal Jonathan. But his sorrow over the king's death was also genuine. While Saul lived, David respected Saul's position, and he would continue to do so now that he was dead. As we've discussed, David and Saul were polar opposites. David was internally motivated, whereas Saul was externally motivated. Saul's inner disposition was tied to other people's opinions and to his own consequences, good or bad. Whereas David was hardwired. His emotions were hardwired directly to the will of God. That's how I want to live my life. Though Saul's death benefited David, he wasn't thinking selfishly here. He saw a defeated army and the cadaver of a God-anointed king hanging on a Philistine wall. It brought shame to God's name, and David mourned. He cared more for God's glory than even for his own welfare. Verse 13. Well, then David said to the young man, the Amalekite, "How was it you were not afraid to put forth your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed?" David had been afraid to kill Saul. You remember the cave? Why did this man not care? And then David called one of the young men and said, "Go near and execute him." And he struck him so that he died. And so David said to him, "Your blood is on your own head, for your own mouth has testified against you, saying, I have killed the Lord's anointed." The Amalekite expected a reward. Instead, he got a sword. Realize David's position. For over a decade, Saul has chased David like a wild rabbit, made his life miserable. Twice, David has had his enemy within his grasp, but chose to spare his life. Now, if David lets this man live, it'll be seen as a stamp of approval on Saul's murder. His critics will interpret his leniency as part of a coup d'etat. David respects a dead Saul to set a precedent. If he expects people to respect him as king, he needs to respect his predecessor, kill the king, and you should be punished. And I think this is a lesson for parents as well. You know, David may have been tempted to let this Amalekite off the hook. After all, he thought he was doing David a favor. And there are times when parents are tempted to be lenient on their kids. We fail to enforce vital principles, and yet, in doing so, we set bad precedents. Never forget, leniency today can produce lawlessness tomorrow. Well, verse 17 tells us, then David lamented with this lamentation over Saul and over Jonathan his son. And he told them to teach the children of Judah the song of the bow. Indeed, it is written in the book of Jasher. Now, this book of Jasher is very interesting. It was actually an ancient history. It was an extra-biblical book, and it's quoted by several of the biblical authors. The problem, though, is that it no longer exists. Several books were written in the Middle Ages that went by this name. Today, even the Mormons have a so-called book of Jasher, but they're all forgeries. None of them are this book. It no longer exists. In verses 19 to 27, we do have a psalm by David. It's called the Song of the Bow. One commentator writes of this song, it stands out as the genuine outpouring of a noble heart, a heart too great to harbor one selfish thought in this dark hour of his country's humiliation. David absorbs Israel's losses now while oblivious to his own gain. And so the song begins. The beauty of Israel is slain on your high places. How the mighty have fallen. Tell it not in Gath. Proclaim it not in the streets of Ashkelon. Both were Philistine cities, remember, where they might have gloated over Israel's downfall in Saul's death. He says, lest the daughters of the Philistines rejoice. Don't give your enemies an opportunity to rejoice, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised triumph. On mountains of Gilboa, let there be no dew. That was the scene of Saul's death. Let there be no dew, nor rain upon you, nor fields of offerings, for the shield of the mighty is cast away there, the shield of Saul, not anointed with oil. And the implication there is that Saul was unprepared for battle. You see, the ancient Hebrews, when they went to war, they always saturated their shields in olive oil to help deflect the arrows. And olive oil was not the only oil that Saul lacked. The oil of the Holy Spirit had departed from Saul long before this battle. And thus Saul lacked God's help and assistance in the conflict. He goes on in this psalm, from the blood of the slain, from the fat of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan did not turn back, and the sword of Saul did not return empty. They fought to the death, in other words. And what follows are incredibly gracious words. David speaks glowingly of a man who had tried to kill him. Saul and Jonathan were beloved and pleasant in their lives. It had been a long time since Saul had been beloved and pleasant. David continues to assume the best about his enemy. He says, and in their death, that is Saul and his son, they were not divided. They were swifter than eagles. They were stronger than lions. O daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you in scarlet with luxury, who put ornaments of gold on your apparel. Saul's reign had brought a degree of prosperity to Israel. How the mighty have fallen in the midst of the battle. Jonathan was slain in your high places. I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. You have been very pleasant to me. Your love to me was wonderful, surpassing the love of women. And as I stated a few weeks ago, the language here is not evidence of a homosexual relationship between Jonathan and David. He is simply stating here that he had never had a friend as loyal and as true as Jonathan. Not even his former wives. You remember Saul's daughters? Not even Saul's daughters were as faithful to David as Jonathan had been. Jonathan had been more loyal than a wife, than the love of women. This kind of goes along with the lyrics of the old country song, you know. My wife ran off with my best friend, and I sure do miss him. Jonathan says, I'm going to miss, David said, I'm going to miss Jonathan. Not so much the wives. Verse 27 concludes the song of the bow, how the mighty have fallen and the weapons of war perished. Now remember in 1 Samuel 15 when Saul reached out to grab Samuel and he tore his robe, and the Lord said that the kingdom would be torn from Saul and given to David. You remember that? Well, in essence, God looked at Saul and he said, Euripides? And then God turned to David and he said, Eumenides. And it will now become David's job to mend a fractured kingdom. The repairing of the nation begins in chapter 2. It happened after this that David inquired of the Lord, and that's interesting. You know, his job, he's got a big job in front of him. He's to repair the damage Saul's done. But the first thing he does is to inquire of the Lord. He knows where his help comes from. Saying, shall I go up to any of the cities of Judah? And the Lord said to him, go up. And David said, where shall I go up? And he said, to Hebron. And so David went up, and his 2 wives, and David brought up the men who were with him, every man with his household. And so they dwelt in the cities of Hebron. Now David makes a smart move. He could have assumed it was time to head home to Israel, but instead he seeks God's will. Never forget Proverbs 16, verse 25. It's always in the back of my mind. There is a way that seems right to a man, but the end is the way of death. That's why you're foolish to assume. Always ask the Lord for his direction. Lord, am I reading this right? And notice the brevity of God's answer. God answers him, but it's a short answer. God charts the course of David's future in 4 words. Go up to Hebron. Realize when God speaks to us, it's not always a detailed explanation. Long, flowery speeches are not God's forte. God usually gets straight to the point with me. He tells me exactly what I need to be doing, and he doesn't necessarily give me a long, detailed explanation in the process. Verse 4. Then the men of Judah came to Hebron, and there they anointed David king over the house of Judah. David will actually get anointed 3 times as king. The first time was by Samuel. Remember back when David was in his father's house, under his father's roof. The second time is here, upon his return to Judah and to Hebron. And the third time will be 7 years later when he becomes king over all Israel. Notice David gets anointed afresh every time God enlarges his sphere of influence. And I believe this is why we need multiple fillings of the Holy Spirit. New challenges, expanded territories, demand fresh empowerment. And so we need to pray, Lord, refill me with the Holy Spirit. When David becomes king, he's immediately told that the men of Jabesh Gilead were the ones who had rescued Saul's body from public humiliation and had given him a decent burial. And just as David had been faithful to punish the Amalekites' contempt, he rewards Jabesh's respect of the king. But as David launches his reign over the southern tribe of Judah, the northern tribes of Israel assert their independence. Verse 8. But Abner, the son of Ner, commander of Saul's army, took Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, and brought him over to Mahanaim. Now this will be Ishbosheth's capital. It was east of the Jordan River. It was 20 miles south of the Sea of Galilee. This is where Israel had fled after Saul's death, after he died in battle. The Philistines are now occupying the west bank, David now ruling in the south in Judah. And General Abner made Saul's son Ishbosheth king over Gilead, over the Asherites, over Jezreel, over Ephraim, over Benjamin, and over all Israel. Abner, the general, now wants to perpetuate Saul's dynasty. And David has a new rival all of a sudden, Saul's surviving son, Ishbosheth. Now, Ishbosheth, Saul's son, was 40 years old when he began to reign over Israel. And he reigned 2 years. Only the house of Judah followed David. And the time that David was king in Hebron over the house of Judah was 7 years and 6 months. Saul's 3 oldest sons had died in battle on Mount Gilboa, leaving Ishbosheth as Saul's heir. Ishbosheth means man of shame. And that was a fitting name for this fella. Ishbosheth was a weak leader. During his time, Israel was more a military junta, led by General Abner. Abner was the strong man. Ishbosheth was just a puppet. David could have launched a civil war, but as usual, David shows restraint. That's a mark of good leadership. The ability to show restraint. Hey, just because you can doesn't mean you should. Well, David sets up his reign in Hebron while Ishbosheth rules in Mahanaim for the next 2 years, during which time these little border skirmishes occur between the armies led by Saul's old general Abner and David's general Joab. And one of these skirmishes takes place in verse 12. Now Abner, the son of Ner, and the servants of Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, went out from Mahanaim to Gibeon. And Joab, the son of Zeruiah, and the servants of David went out and met them by the pool of Gibeon. So they sat down, one on one side of the pool and the other on the other side of the pool. Then Abner said to Joab, "Let the young men now arise and compete before us." And Joab said, "Let them arise." Now understand, at the time, there are no open hostilities. There's no declarations of war here between Israel and Judah. These were just 2 armies on border patrol who happened to end up at the same watering hole. These soldiers are bored. I mean, men join the army looking for action. They want to be all they can be. Abner chooses to break up the monotony with some friendly competition. And so he challenges David's general Joab to a friendly joust. Again now, this isn't war. This is the Army-Navy football game. That's what this is. Just give the soldiers something to do in peacetime. And so they arose and they went over by number. 12 from Benjamin, followers of Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, and 12 from the servants of David. One more in a football team. And each one grasped his opponent by the head and thrust his sword in his opponent's side. So they fell down together. This thing blows up. Therefore, that place was called the Field of Sharp Swords, which is in Gibeon. So there was a very fierce battle that day, and Abner and the men of Israel were beaten before the servants of David. I mean, this is like a baseball game. Baseball is a civilized sport. You know, baseball is a gentleman's sport. That is until somebody throws a fastball under another guy's chin. And then all of a sudden, you know what happens? They run in from the bullpen. They come out of the dugouts. There's a rhubarb. There's a fisticuffs in the middle of the diamond. That's what happened here. These were just gentlemen competing with each other. 24 soldiers had squared off for a wrestling match. Again, just a little entertainment for the troops. But suddenly, tempers flared. Competitors got carried away. Somebody draws blood. And suddenly, we got a melee. A real Donnybrook on our hands. Just a few moments ago, this was a friendly fun and games. Now, it is a very fierce battle. 24 men are lying dead in the field. And when Abner sees that David's men are winning, he tries to escape. Verse 18. Now the 3 sons of Zeruiah were there, Joab, Abishai, and Asahel. And Asahel was as fleet of foot as a wild gazelle. Asahel had wheels. He could run. He was a Hebrew Usain Bolt. I mean, a world-class sprinter. Now get the picture. Abner is old and tired and slow. Asahel is young and fast and fresh. And so Asahel pursued Abner. And in going, he did not turn to the right hand or to the left. He's determined. This is urgent. He didn't move one way or the other from following Abner. He took out after him. Then Abner looked behind him and he said, "Are you Asahel?" And he answered, "I am." Both men are racing through the forest now. Oh, Abner's huffing and puffing on the verge of a coronary, while the much younger, fleeter-footed Asahel is hot on his tracks. Asahel is gaining ground by the second. He's quickly closing down the gap. And Abner said to him, "Turn aside to your right hand or to your left and lay hold on one of the young men and take his armor for yourself." In other words, back off or be prepared to fight. And when Abner said that, he meant it. But Asahel would not turn aside from following him. And so Abner said again to Asahel, "Turn aside from following me. Why should I strike you to the ground? How then could I face your brother Joab?" Abner knows what's about to happen. This young, inexperienced Asahel is no match for a battle-hardened warrior like Abner. The old general doesn't want to kill Asahel. That's the last thing he wants. He doesn't want to inflame his old rival Joab. He says, "Leave me alone. Just back off." However, he refused to turn aside. Asahel won't stop. Asahel had stopped thinking. He's now caught up in the thrill of the chase. Oh, the adrenaline is now pumping. Ambition has blinded him to danger. Therefore, Abner struck him in the stomach with the blunt end of the spear, so that the spear came out of his back, and he fell down there and died on the spot. Imagine Asahel. He's just about to catch his prey when suddenly old Abner, he slams on the brakes. He braces himself. He sticks his spear back like that so that Asahel runs right in to the blunt end of the spear. It punctures Asahel in the midsection like a skewer going through grilled vegetables. Sadly, the lesson came too late for him to benefit from it, but Asahel finally gets the point. Countless times in this pursuit, he could have backed off. But here's the warning. Adrenaline is addictive. Asahel got caught up in the rush of the race. And he stopped thinking wisely. He stopped thinking clearly. And so it was that as many as came to the place where Asahel fell down and died stood still. This story is a pointed reminder that there are some battles in life not worth fighting. Rather than push on, we're better to back off. Friends, if you're fixated on an ungodly or an unhealthy goal, give it up while you can before your goal kills you. It's been said, a bulldog can whip a skunk, but is it really worth the effort? Now, don't misunderstand. There are some causes in life worth dying for. But you can't throw your life away on pursuits that really don't matter. Some of us have spent far too much of our lives chasing our Abner. You know, he also goes by names like fame, or money, or success, or corporate accomplishment. We've been in hot pursuit. We've thrown caution to the wind. We've been addicted to the chase, a chase that has now become an ego trip. But have you considered what it's going to cost you if you catch him? And if caught, will the results really be worth the sacrifice? Often the pursuit of a dream can become a nightmare if not directed by God. Please evaluate your motive. One of my favorite movies is The Man from Snowy River. I refer to this often. The main character, Jim Craig, he loses a valuable mare in a stampeding herd of wild brumbies. And he gets fixated on getting that mare back. It's all he can think about. He's so focused on the lost mare, he's forgotten that he no longer owns a horse. And when Jim's buddy Spur gives him a mountain horse, he adds a warning. He says, "Forget the mare, you duffer. Don't throw effort after foolishness." How many of us have been throwing effort after foolishness? That's good advice. Have you been wasting time and effort in the wrong direction? Something that's really not going to benefit you that much anyway? Be careful. You chase your Abner, and you might regret that you caught him. Well, verse 24. Joab and Abishai also pursued Abner. They finally catch up to Abner on a hill in the wilderness of Gibeon. And that's when Abner turns around and proposes a truce. Abner called to Joab and said, "Shall the sword devour forever? Do you not know that it will be bitter in the latter end? How long will it be then until you tell the people to return from pursuing their brethren?" Abner sees the folly in all that's happened here. Men on both sides are dying over what? This was just a good idea gone mad. David's general Joab, he agrees to a ceasefire. But he doesn't yet know about the fate of his brother Asahel. Verse 28. And so Joab blew a trumpet, and all the people stood still and did not pursue Israel anymore, nor did they fight anymore. Abner returns home to Mahanaim, Israel's capital, east of the Jordan. Joab also returns home to Hebron. And in verse 30, Joab takes a roll call of the troops. And there were missing of David's servants 19 men and Asahel. But the servants of David had struck down of Benjamin and Abner's men 360 men who died. This foolish act cost 360 men their lives. How tragic. Verse 32. Then they took up Asahel and buried him in his father's tomb, which was in Bethlehem. And Joab and his men went all night, and they came to Hebron at daybreak. Joab buries his brother, but he doesn't forget who murdered him. And a lethal bitterness begins to brew in the heart of Joab toward Abner. Well, 2 Samuel chapter 3, verse 1 summarizes the 2 years that the kingdom is divided. There was a long war between the house of Saul and the house of David. But David grew stronger and stronger, and the house of Saul grew weaker and weaker. And why not? David loved God. David was God's choice for king. On the other hand, Saul had lacked God's blessing. No wonder the house of David grew stronger, while the house of Saul grew weaker. And you know, the same plays out in our lives. Live under the influence of God's Spirit. You'll grow stronger. Walk in the flesh. Isolate yourself from God, and you'll get weaker and weaker. Well, sons were born to David in Hebron. His firstborn was Amnon by Ahinoam. His second, Chileab by Abigail. The third, Absalom, the son of Maacah, the daughter of Talmah, king of Geshur. I like that name, Chileab. Any of you want to have a baby? Be a great name, Chileab. We'll dedicate him. Absalom is born of a pagan princess. You know, David apparently married Maacah to seal a peace treaty with her father. It happened often in those days. It was prudent politically, but it violated God's law, remember. Deuteronomy 17 prohibited the king from multiplying wives and establishing a harem. David was guilty of that. Verse 4, the fourth, Adonijah, the son of Haggith. The fifth, Shephatiah, the son of Abital. And the sixth, Ithream, by David's wife Eglah. These were born to David in Hebron. David ended up with 8 wives, 19 sons, and we're told later of 1 daughter. Chapter 3 tells us of the power struggle that occurs in Mahanaim, in the court of Saul's son Ishbosheth. Now it was so, while there was war between the house of Saul and the house of David, that Abner was strengthening his hold on the house of Saul. And Saul had a concubine whose name was Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah. So Ishbosheth said to Abner, "Why have you gone into my father's concubine?" Now you wonder what's going on in Abner's mind now. He has spent his whole life faithfully serving a madman named Saul. Now he's propping up a weakling son named Ishbosheth. And I'm sure Abner's thinking, what about me, man? I deserve more than a military pension. What about me? I mean, where's my perks? Where's my reward? Here's a once faithful servant who is developing an entitlement mentality. And friends, that can happen to you and me. You start thinking, nobody appreciates the sacrifices I make. Oh, I deserve more. Hey, I'm going to grab me a few perks while I can. And we start taking what doesn't belong to us. The gold, the girls, the glory. Well, Abner here sleeps with the king's concubine. And when King Ishbosheth confronts Abner, the old general bristles up. Verse 8. Abner became very angry at the words of Ishbosheth and said, "Am I a dog's head that belongs to Judah?" I don't know what that means, but I'm sure it was ugly. "Today I show loyalty to the house of Saul your father, to his brothers and to his friends, and have not delivered you into the hand of David. And you charge me today with a fault concerning this woman? After all I've done for you, you rebuke me for shacking up with Saul's girlfriend? May God do so to Abner and more also, if I do not do for David as the Lord has sworn to him, to transfer the kingdom from the house of Saul and set up the throne of David over Israel and over Judah, from Dan to Beersheba, from north to south," he says. Abner is so angry, he threatens to jump ship. If Ishbosheth doesn't appreciate him, he's going to fight for David. And Ishbosheth could not answer Abner another word. Why? Because he feared him. Then Abner sent messengers on his behalf to David, saying, "Whose is the land?" saying also, "Make your covenant with me, and indeed my hand shall be with you to bring all Israel to you." Abner wants to defect, and he wants to use his influence to create a northern revolt. David agrees to ally himself with Abner, provided one thing, provided Abner return Michal, David's ex, to him. Now earlier, in an act of sheer spite, remember what Saul had done? Saul had taken his daughter Michal away from David after having given to him as his wife. Saul had taken Michal away from David and made her marry another man named Paltiel. And now David wants his wife back. He tells Abner, he says, hey, that'd be great. We'll ally. But I need Michal back. That's the one catch. These other 8 women aren't doing it for me. I need Michal. And yet, sadly, David does to Paltiel what Saul had done to him. It's kind of tragic. Verse 16 is just such a terrible verse. Then her husband went along with her to Bahurim, weeping behind her. And so Abner said to him, go return. And he returned. In other words, Abner says, stop your whining. Just go home. Oh, Paltiel, he may have loved Michal, but not enough to fight old Abner for her. That's for sure. Now Abner had communicated with the elders of Israel, saying, in time past you were seeking for David to be king over you. Now then do it. For the Lord has spoken of David, saying, by the hand of my servant David I will save my people Israel from the hand of the Philistines and the hand of all their enemies. And Abner also spoke in the hearing of Benjamin. Abner intends to lead the entire northern kingdom away from Ishbosheth and pledge their loyalty to King David. Now in verse 19, Abner and a delegation of 20 men, they journey to Hebron to speak with David. He pledges his loyalty to the king, and David embraces his old nemesis. He sees in Abner a change of heart that might unite the nation, a hope that will soon be spoiled. For after Abner leaves, Joab rides into town. He's come back from a raid, and he's told that David has had a visitor. And when Joab hears who it is, he erupts. Abner? He yells at David, what have you done? Abner can't be trusted. He's up to no good. He's probably a spy. Verse 26. And when Joab had gone from David's presence, he sent messengers after Abner, who brought him back from the well of Sarah. And David did not know it. Now remember, Joab has an axe to grind. David might be willing to let bygones be bygones, but not Joab. Abner had murdered his kid brother, Asahel. And Joab hadn't forgotten. Now when Abner had returned to Hebron, I guess he expected, a good thing. Joab took him aside in the gate to speak with him privately. Joab walks up to General Abner, and he's got a dagger up under his sleeve. And there stabbed him in the stomach, so that he died for the blood of Asahel, his brother. And when David heard it, he said, my kingdom and I are guiltless before the Lord forever for the blood of Abner, the son of Ner. Let it rest on the head of Joab and on all his father's house. And let there never fail to be in the house of Joab one who has a discharge, or is a leper, who leans on a staff, or falls by the sword, or who lacks bread. Now understand this. David utters a cruel curse of judgment on the family of Joab. He says, may your house be plagued with leprosy, with murder, with starvation. But all David does here is offer words. And for the first time, we see a dangerous tendency that is going to haunt King David for the rest of his life. He fails to discipline the people closest to him. Here he should have punished Joab, but he never did. He just scolded him, but he never punished him. And so Joab and Abishai, his brother, killed Abner because he had killed their brother Asahel at Gibeon in the battle. Joab got his revenge. But David has a political crisis now in his hands. Abner had tried to defect, and yet he was killed. Now nobody's going to be able to trust David. And so David needs to do some damage control. Verse 31. Then David said to Joab and to all the people who were with him, tear your clothes, gird yourselves with sackcloth, and mourn for Abner. Oh, Joab was smiling on the inside, but David made him join in this display of public mourning. And David followed the coffin. Legend has it that the pallbearers dropped the coffin. It slid down this grassy hill, and it flew right through the plate glass window of the local pharmacy. And David came running into the pharmacy, clearing his throat and shouting, got anything to stop this coffin? David mourned Abner as some of you are now mourning my joke. Well, Abner's given a state funeral. He's buried in Hebron. All Israel mourns his loss. King David even sings a lamentation over Abner and fasts all day long. Verse 36 tells us. Now all the people took note of it, and it pleased them, since whatever the king did pleased all the people. Notice that David is rising in popularity now. For all the people in all Israel understood that day that it had not been the king's intent to kill Abner the son of Ner. And then the king said to his servants, do you not know that a prince and a great man has fallen this day in Israel? And I am weak today, though anointed king. And these men, the sons of Zeruiah, man, they're too harsh for me. He distanced himself from Joab. The Lord shall repay the evildoer according to his wickedness. And again, David trusted God to repay Joab for his evil, but David was king, and he was responsible for meting out a justice that he never delivered. Now, when Saul's son, King Ishbosheth, heard that Abner had died in Hebron, he lost heart, and all Israel was troubled. And now Saul's son had two men who were captains of troops, Baanah and Rechab. Realize without General Abner, they're no match for David's army. Their best hope is to assassinate Ishbosheth. Verse 4 is a sidebar. Jonathan, Saul's son, had a son who was lame in his feet. He was 5 years old when the news about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel. And his nurse took him up and fled. And as she made haste to flee, that he fell and became lame. They dropped him, and he became crippled. His name was Mephibosheth. And he's brought up here because later Mephibosheth is going to teach us some wonderful lessons about God's grace. He's going to be important later. Now in verse 5, the two captains, they sneak into Ishbosheth's quarters. It's noon. It's in the heat of the day. They find the king lying on his bed. He's taking a nap. And they stab him right in the gut. They then chop off his head. They run all night. They take the head back to David. Again, the captains think that they're helping David get ahead. But remember what he did to the Amalekite who came to tell him about Saul's death? Oh, the same fate awaits them. For David says in verse 11, how much more when wicked men have killed a righteous person in his own house on his own bed, shall I not now require his blood at your hand and remove you from the earth? So David commanded his young men, and they executed them, cut off their hands and feet, and hanged them by the pool in Hebron. But they took the head of Ishbosheth and buried it in the tomb of Abner in Hebron. More heads have rolled in today's chapters than bowling balls on a Friday night. And there have been no spares, have there? No spares, just a lot of strikes and gutters. Literally. And one more thing before we leave. If you're chasing an Abner, please consider where this might end up. Be smart. Don't throw effort after foolishness.